Yo, what's going on, happy peoples? I'm excited to. So I actually met Hayden at the Summit of Greatness. So we reconnected. I mean, we've been staying in touch, but it's so crazy that we both graduated from accomplishment coaching and that we both worked at LinkedIn together. Like, well, there, he was in a different office, but yeah, it's just like it's crazy, right? Because like you would never think going to a random conference in another state, meeting someone that had, and the accomplishment coaching isn't huge, right? It's not like thousands of people. It's like maybe like 150 people like combined, right? But
Mhm.
yeah, so yeah, really excited to introduce to you Hayden Humphrey. He's a coach, a success coach, and he helps people unwrite their scripts. So societal norms has you think a certain way, be a certain way, and he helps you be able to step into your greatness and be able to like be your own person. And yeah, we'd love to explore that more with you, Hayden. Happy to.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, man. It was funny. Before we started talking, you're like, it's a year since we got connected. And it was a funny connection story because I think we went out to lunch and we were sitting there getting lunch and we were talking. And I was like, yeah, I went through this program, accomplishment coaching. And you're like, oh, dude, me too. And I was like, yeah, before that, I worked at LinkedIn. And you're like, oh, dude, me too. So it's so funny, like how much overlap there was there. But yeah, man, super excited to be here. I love what you're doing with the show, and I just like love the stuff that you're up to. So yeah, man, excited to get into it.
Yeah, as I'm also a recovering, I love what you said about being a recovering people pleaser, right?
Yeah.
Hard, like I don't think it'll ever go away completely. I think it's almost like ingrained in me, and it's helped us get like this far, obviously, right?
Hmm.
You've had like a ton of success. You worked at some of the world's best companies slash, you know went to like one of the world's best training program. Maybe we're biased, but I've been to so
Hmm.
many other training programs like Next Level and Landmark, and
Hmm.
accomplishment coaching. I think I'm probably still the closest to that community, even though
Hmm.
I've spent like just as much time in some of these other communities.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, the interesting thing about people pleasing, and I think just uh, these self sabotage, kind of disempowered behaviors and stories that we have. I think you're right in that they don't ever go away. I think the opportunity is just getting more responsible for how they might be getting in the way of what you want, and then looking at like how you can practice something different. Because the thing about people pleasing is like, and I don't think we don't talk about it a whole lot, but like it is particularly insidious in that what I find is people who struggle with people pleasing, it shows up in a lot of different ways in a lot of different areas. And it's a huge power leak. Like it's actually every time that you people please, you're giving away your own sense of personal power and integrity. But it doesn't necessarily feel like that in the moment.
Hmm.
And so I think a big part of this work and part of like why I like talking with people about it is because there are parts of it that are really good and beneficial. Like I think it's really great to be amiable and gregarious and be able to read a room and make sure everyone feels included and not be judgmental and keep the peace. And there's really positive things to it. It's great. And when it's extreme in the extremes, it tends to come at the cost of your own sense of well-being and how you feel about yourself and your ability to go out and like exact meaningful change in the world and get what you want is inhibited. And so, yeah, I think I've been just trying to do a lot of my own work around getting responsible for it and doing something different. And as I've gone through that process, I've just learned a lot about like how it shows up and how it gets in my way and all these little sneaky things that you don't really know. And so it's been fun to like put that stuff together and like supporting other people and coming to those same realizations. And a lot of that comes from the training programs that I've been involved in, accomplishment coaching being a big one of those.
I mean, we're just gonna go right into it. I mean, if you don't mind sharing, like,
Yeah.
were there a few defining moments that have helped you kind of like shaped who you are in the sense of like, oh, this, helping people, being inclusive, like means I'm a good person. I mean, I could share like
Hmm.
personally, like how that's like a few moments that has helped me become that, but I don't know if you want to share first.
Yeah. Um, oh man, in terms of like being inclusive. So, I think with like me, I feel really grateful in that I think a lot of that is just part of like it's just like my natural way of being is inclusive and wanting the best for other people and like wanting to be non-judgmental.
Mm,
uh and so I mean, honestly, I feel kind of lucky in that regard. Like that piece of it that hasn't been something that I've had to like work at. Like
mm,
me wanting to like share my love of people and love for other people, I think has just been sort of like a natural tendency of mine. But in terms of like, breaking out of the unhealthier aspect or like the unhealthier side of it, a couple big moments that stand out for me were like, when I was in college, like saying no to this full-time job offer that I had from a really prestigious professional services firm in New York without having any sort of backup plan, because I just trusted in my gut that this wasn't the right opportunity and I didn't want to do this and I wanted to do I wanted to do something different. And it worked out, and I ended up getting this really cool job in San Francisco, and
mm.
worked at a startup, which is part of what led me to LinkedIn, which was an awesome experience in and of itself. And then when I was working at LinkedIn, I had an experience where I missed my sales quota, and it was another sort of like come to the light moment. And I was like, this is not what I want. I want to be doing something different. And so, let me start to, go out and try and figure out what that is. And so I left that company and have been working for myself since then. So that was another, pretty big defining moment for me. And then honestly, it's been sort of just like a conglomeration of things in the last like 3 years. Like, that I wouldn't necessarily say, I'd have to sit and think about it, but I don't think there's been any like holy crap, kind of moment in the last 3 years. It's just been a lot of like little holy crap moments.
Uh,
In like, going through accomplishment coaching in 2018, that was huge for me. Because I spent an entire year like getting clear on how I was getting in my own way and having people remind me on an almost daily basis of who I like, the greatness and who I am, and like who I am innately as a person and as an individual, and like the great things that I bring to the table. So, that's been, really powerful and transformative. And then going out and building these businesses and getting involved. Like I built a photography business for a year and a half, ton of really cool learning from that. That was like super awesome. I've done like in-person workshops, like improv workshops for corporate companies. That's been
uh,
super fun and cool, and like have learned a ton about myself that way. Well, some of the other things that I'll share, for example, actually one thing that just came to my brain was like, I realized that for me, a big part of my commitment in life is my own personal growth and development. It's healing. Like that's my underlying commitment, is to heal myself and
mm.
continue to build and develop my relationship with myself. So, any opportunity or any experience that allows me to do that is one that I'm open to trying. So, for example, I don't know if are you familiar with ayahuasca?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went last year, I went to Costa Rica for 9 days, and I did an ayahuasca retreat for, 9 days.
Wow.
And that was a really cool experience. And it's opened my mind up to a lot of different avenues for healing and a lot of different
Mm,
avenues for growth. And, I think when you take away the method or the vehicle, like how that learning is being delivered, and you just simply look at it as an opportunity to like come home to yourself and heal, core wounds and traumas, like that's a beautiful experience, beautiful opportunity. And so that was really cool too, for me as well. So very, very long-winded answer to your question, but I'd say some of the career decisions that I made, and then, more recently, like this ayahuasca retreat was pretty big for me.
wow, so much to talk about, man. We have so many similarities. It's
Yeah.
crazy. I do think like when we come from like ego, right? When we come from, I guess for me, it looks like the external validation of like, oh, you're so nice. Oh, thank you. Thanks for helping me, right? We often forget to put ourselves first, right? Whether that's like, meditation or just getting like your stuff done, right? Like I'm sure
Mm.
for you, there's been so many times where, you're helping your teammates, you're helping your manager, you're like, I'll, people are like, hey, can you help me with this project? You're like, yeah, sure. And then there's like another thing on your plate and another thing. And then before you know it, you're like, oh my God, I didn't even get my actual work done yet because I'm helping
Yep.
literally everyone else and their moms and all the new hires and then before you're like, why am I not doing as well? It's like, oh right, because I spent 90% of my day like accomplishing everyone else's task.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. I mean, that's like been one of the biggest things that I've had to work on is setting those boundaries with people. And that's just been recent. That's been in like the last like 6 to 8 months that I've been like actively like, oh, boundaries are a thing. Cause I think, that's the funny thing about stuff like boundaries and healthy relationships. Your relationship dynamics, how you build relationship with other people was instilled in you by the relationship that you had with your parents.
Hmm.
That's the original relationship. That's where you learned how to be in relationship, how to get your needs met, or, if your needs weren't going to get met, how to like covertly or overtly manipulate the situation so that your needs, did get met. And I think for people who are people pleasers, there is the tendency, I think, is that there's this sense of, I just have to give. Like, what makes me good or valuable as a human being is me giving and being of service to other people, even when it's at the at the cost or at the expense of my own experience or my own sense of well-being. And so it's almost scary when you think about, my sense of self equals giving to other people. The idea of setting boundaries and saying, I can't take this on right now. I don't want to be in this conversation, or I need time to myself, or, whatever the boundary is that's being set. I totally get why people avoid doing it and why it's terrifying, because based on how you've created the equation, if you don't serve someone, then you're not a valuable person, or you're not worth it, or, whatever it might be. So I think what you're saying and what you're sharing is so valuable and so important, because, a huge part of like starting to break up the people pleasing is being willing to say no, and is being willing to put your needs first, like especially when it's uncomfortable.
Mm. I'm curious, what Enneagram are you?
I'm a 1 wing 2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm like, I think I just need to do more research on the Enneagram. I like sort of know stuff about the Enneagram. So I know it's like I think it's like the idealist or reformer or like evangelist, I think is sometimes what it's called, which feels pretty right for me. I kind of read through it and I'm like, yeah, this is pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then your wing the helper, right? So that's probably
Yeah.
like where some of the more people pleasing tendencies come in on the wing part. Yeah.
Totally. Being of service to others. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I would say.
And I wanted to go back to what you said about these out of body experiences, right? It's
Hmm.
it's fascinating. Like for me personally, I feel like those moments have been like the most actually life-changing
Hmm.
experiences, right? And it's
Hmm.
crazy how like 1 week or 9 days can truly impact like literally like the trajectory of your life. It's insane
Yep.
to think, like wow, like this has such a significant impact in who I am as a human being.
So I think that this is the cool part about personal development and just the way that the world works. Everything works in patterns. Everything's patterns. Everything is a system. And so when you support someone in bringing awareness to the core patterns that are running their life,
Hmm.
they can't unsee that. You can't unsee that. Once you realize, like, oh, this is a thing that I'm doing, you can't unknow the thing or the core pattern that you then have. And
Yeah.
I think that's the beautiful thing about this work is like, I tell people it's like going to the gym in a sense, but the cool part about it is like, with muscle, if you don't work it over time, you lose it. But I'm like, with awareness, it's cumulative. Like you continue to like generate and accumulate these awarenesses. And so I think, with what you shared around these out of body experiences, I think that there's so much opportunity to intentionally create those kind of containers for people. It's how do you create an experience for someone where they can step into an environment, a situation, a container, whatever word you want to use for it, and they're so far removed from their current sense of reality, and they're put into a completely alternate, hey, did you realize that this is what you're doing? Did you realize that this is getting in the way of what you want? Did you realize that you could actually have all these other things that you thought that you haven't been able to have yet? Like just that, even if it's for a day or for an hour or for however long it is, like that is truly transformative, and it is trajectory shifting, because once you leave, you can't unsee the awareness that you had. That seed has been planted. The seed of my life could be different because I've been shown how it could be different has been planted. And granted, it's up to that person whether or not they want to choose to continue to water it. Do they want to grow that seed? Do they want to take on more work? Do they want to see a coach? Do they want to go to therapy? Do they want to put themselves in some structure that's going to have them actually, in the long term, grow that seed into something that's different for themselves? Who knows? But I don't necessarily think that as people who are involved in personal development and transformational work, our work is not to force people to change. Our job is simply to present them an alternative way of viewing themselves and their lives, planting that seed. And then ultimately it's up to that person to decide whether or not they want to actually do something with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think if we relate to others from a place of like fixing or
Yeah.
you have to do this, people are resistant to it, right? Because it's like we're relating to them like they're broken, or
Yeah.
they need to be a certain way, right? Instead of just like just with love and with like positive intentions and with just from like a strong trusting relationship, people are like, oh, okay, like I see, they actually, I see that they got my back and they're just actually looking out for me.
Well, no one likes to be told what to do. And it's really funny. I just I just did an Instagram post about this the other day, but the interesting thing about change and the interesting thing about wanting other people to change is that you you have to be careful about how you approach it, because you know um, a lot of times it's like, I just so want this person to change, and so therefore I'm going to point it out to them, or I'm going to nag them, or I'm going to complain, or I'm going to like covertly give them feedback, or whatever it is. But the funny part about it is like none of those things are loving. Like judgment is not loving.
Right.
Beratement is not loving. Nagging is not loving. Criticism is not loving a lot of times. And any action, I'm a firm believer that any action taken from fear most often will be met with a reaction from fear.
Right.
And so if I'm judging this person and trying to force them to change, the likely thing, and we've all been in situations where this has happened, the likely thing is that they're going to shut down, they're going to get defensive, they're going to attack back, they're going to become more guarded, or whatever it is, but they're not going to listen because you've brought an assertion about who they are. You've basically attacked them in a sense. And so now the automatic reaction for them is to get defensive. I have to defend myself against this attack that you've just brought against me.
Right.
And there's no listening. There's no openness or curiosity in moving forward. And ultimately, the point that you brought, the thing that you want them to realize or that you hope that they realize, isn't going to be heard. It's going to be totally lost in the dynamics of that interaction. And so I think the counterintuitive thing with change is that the only way that you can have someone possibly, maybe, potentially change is by being completely non-judgmental and 100% compassionate, regardless of what they do. And that doesn't mean don't set boundaries. That doesn't mean let someone do whatever they want to you. Those are two different conversations. But the idea is, I'm going to hold this non-judgmental space. And if this person decides to step out and do something different, change their behavior, which is vulnerable, doing something different is vulnerable, they'll step out in their vulnerability and they'll be met with non-judgment. They'll be met with love. They'll be met with acknowledgement, with celebration, with affirmation. And that is the thing that's then going to have them go back and say, cool, well, I tried this different thing and it got met with love. Maybe I keep doing it. Maybe I keep leaning into this behavior and doing this thing differently. But when it comes to changing other people, ultimately we have no control over that. Someone has to decide, when and how and where they're going to do it. And the only thing that we can do is just love them and accept them if and when they decide to make that decision. But that's hard. It's a hard thing to practice.
Yeah, that's very profound what you said about the not like what you said about I mean there's a lot of profound things you just said there and there's a lot to like take in, but I do think to your point, like if it's coming from fear, like if you wanting them to change because of like how you want that you think they should be a certain way, and maybe it's true, right? But a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times it's like our own insecurities and our own
Yeah.
projections that we're projecting onto others. So we have to be responsible that is this what's truly better for them, or is it just because
Mm,
like I want them to be a certain
mm,
way, you know?
yeah. That's a really brilliant point. Um, it's funny because part of it's like not, well, it's not that it doesn't matter, but I think the thing that you're pointing to is like using other people as a mirror, or using relationships as an opportunity also to get clear on your own, the next opportunity for you in your own growth and development. And as an ontological coach, and for those folks listening, ontological is it's ontology. It's the study of being, who you're deciding to be, where you're deciding to come from. But your and I's job as ontological coaches is expanding our ability to be with. So it's expanding our ability to be with people who might have previously triggered us or sent us into some automatic, reactionary, unconscious behavioral pattern. And it's just expanding our ability to be with literally everyone, so that regardless of what anyone else brings, we're able to stay seated in a centered, grounded, present state. And I think part of that game is looking at, where do I get triggered right now? Where are the relationships in my life where I have something that I want to change about someone, or something that annoys me about someone, or some, another person that triggers me? And I think it's always just an opportunity to take a look at, to your point, like, what is it about myself that I can't be with that this person is reflecting?
There you go. Yeah.
Because ultimately all of those are just like, external judgments are just projections. They're projections of internal judgment. So it's like, all right, where am I judging myself? Where am I not giving myself the compassion and the love that is, now physically being manifested as judgment of, other people? And once you're clear on that thing, then you can go work on it and work to heal it, and whatever it might be. But if you just look at other people as unchanging, or just static, disconnected from your current experience, then you don't get the opportunity to do that.
Mm. Yeah, that's deep. Like just being able to like not only like be responsible for it, but I think it's interesting, right? Because I do think like, oh yeah, I mean, I'm curious actually if you're willing to share like what's your survival mechanisms that AC has like named.
Yeah. So in through this program, accomplishment coaching, one of the distinctions or exercises that we use is called survival mechanisms. And the idea is, you support someone in understanding a set of behavioral patterns that get in the way of what they want. So you could also think about it as like self-defense, or self-sabotage is usually a way that a lot of people are, aware of it. But it's getting clear on what those behaviors are, and then giving them a name, so that moving forward, it's easier to identify when it's happening and call it out by the name of it, so that you can understand it's happening and then step out of it and do something different. Because that's really what coaching is. That's what transformational work is awareness in the moment of a certain behavior or a certain reaction, and then being able to choose something different. But my survival mechanism names are Don't Rock the Boat Rebel. So it's funny because it's like, it keeps me very quiet, and it has me, a la people pleasing, like, don't rock the boat, don't make waves, don't take up too much space, don't do whatever. But then the flip side of it is like kind of a rebellious side. So when I feel like my boundaries have been crossed, or when I feel like I'm overwhelmed, I tend to get a bit rebellious, like just kind of like F this, F everything. Like I'm not doing any of this. Like I'm leaving.
Uh,
It's funny when it happens because it's kind of rare, but so don't rock the boat, rebel, unlovable perfectionist. That's probably my core one. Is just, one of the core fears that I have in my life is that I'm just this unlovable person that people just don't want to spend time with or spend their energy, or I'm not worthy of those things. And then, you combine it with the perfectionism and it's just really nasty little pattern. And then the last one is self-flagellating superhero. So I like to be the person that does everything. I like to be the person that saves the day. I like to be the person that's like, oh, it's cool. I'll take on all these million things that I shouldn't be, but I will. And then beat the crap out of myself, like beat the living crap out of myself when I don't do it or when I fall short of expectations or, whatever it might be. So it's been interesting because when you first get those names, it's so obvious. You're like, oh my God, here are all of the places where this shows up. And this is so obviously running my life. And, and then over time, they just get sneakier. Like my coach said to me at one point, he's like, the funny thing about survival mechanisms and the funny thing about these self-sabotage patterns is like, as you do more work and as you become more conscious and more aware and more responsible, they get sneakier. So he's like, instead of coming in the front door, like they come in the windows. And so it's like all these little ways over time that you're like, oh, there's the thing. Like, this is the thing. I thought I was over this, but like, here's this pattern again showing up in this, like, in whatever way it is. So yeah, I feel like that's really been the work in the last like 3 years is just continuing to get responsible for those things and, looking at where they still might be getting in the way.
this conversation kind of reminds me of Tim Ferriss's advice on becoming really good at saying no, right?
Yeah.
Because you know how he wrote that book, Tools of Titans
Mm-hmm.
and all that, like Tribe of Mentors. He was saying there were certain people that were so good at saying no that you afterwards, like you felt like you're like, wow, like that was actually empowering, right? Because you think sometimes like rejection is like disempowering, but he's like some people just have a good way of like have such the perfect way of um saying no to people.
Well, it's cool because, I think that those people, it's an assertion, I don't know, but there's what we really value in other people is authenticity. And
Mm,
what we really value in other people is integrity. And so even if someone tells you, like, if you were, this is a random example, but like if you're going out on a date and you really liked the person
mm,
and they came back to you and they very clearly and eloquently and compassionately basically said, hey, you're really great, and like we're just not a fit.
mm,
Like it might sting for a bit and you might be like, damn, that sucks, but ultimately you're like, I respect this person for being so true to who they are and being so authentic and compassionate that they're willing to say no.
mm.
And so it's, I think it's funny because we're so afraid of upsetting someone if we say no to something. That's like the core fear is this person's going to get upset or they're going to get angry or, whatever it might be. And I think 9 times out of 10, if you're very clear and like, this actually doesn't serve me right now, or I don't have the capacity for this right now, or if you bring a very intentional no that is clearly aligned with who you are and what's important to you and what you see as far as like your own commitments, I think 9 times out of 10 the person's going to be like, okay, got it. I gotcha. Thanks for just like being straight up and being in integrity with your commitments and what you see for yourself. And does that mean that every person's gonna do it? No, because you're gonna have that one person that's like, well, screw you, dude. Like, what do you mean no? What do you mean you can't take this on?
Right.
And just because that happens, it doesn't remove the importance of practicing that anyways, because you're going to find people who are exceptions to the rule all the time, but it doesn't make the rule inaccurate or invaluable. It just means that it's an opportunity to practice in spite of reactions, continuing to practice what's important to you, which is saying no to things that don't align with who you are and what you want.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, right? Because I think nowadays, like there's just so many projects, there's so many people, like because social media, like it's even easier to like meet people, right? So
Mm-hmm.
innately, like people are gonna try to get you to help them with whatever it is that they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to, do, right? And then I think many of us kind of maybe just like ignore or like just don't say anything back. But I found the most powerful is when I actually respond back instead of like, oh, I'll respond back to them later this weekend. But then like
Mm-hmm.
over time, over the course of like a week or maybe a month, there's like 5 or 6 people that you still haven't gotten back to. And then like subconsciously, you're kind of like, fuck, like, why do I feel weird? Instead of just like right in the moment, just be like, hey, like, sorry, like, I just don't have the bandwidth for this. Like, I hope you can understand. And then boom, you're done. You don't have to worry about it, and you don't have to wait till the weekend. And that literally took like 5 seconds, right? Versus like
Totally.
at the end of the week, you're like, oh man, why do I feel like I still have something? I still have a couple people to get back to and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think in the realm of like one of the things, and this is something that I'm really in the midst of understanding the power of, but it's being in integrity with your word. And I've been working with a coach, a separate coach. His name's Alexander Riker. He's big on enrollment for coaches. And one of the things that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago was the power of being in integrity and the power of, being your word and owning your word. And what I find is that, especially with people pleasers, but I think people more generally, a lot of times there's this dissonance between who we think we are and how we actually show up. And so if you look at on a day-to-day basis, the actions that you're taking, the conversations that you're in, the commitments that you make, like what you'll tell people that you'll do and what you tell yourself that you'll do,
Hmm.
normally there's a big gap between what you say you'll do and what you actually do.
Right.
And the size of that gap, like that integrity gap, that's where a lot of people's power is. And power being the ability to say something and have it happen.
Mm.
That's where a lot of that goes. And so I think a big part of this work, becoming a more powerful person or becoming someone who is more likely to produce the results that they say they will produce, it's about closing that gap and practicing closing that gap over time so that every time, and it's a trust conversation, trust with self, so that when you say something is going to happen, you have no doubt in your mind that it's going to happen. Because for the past week, in every instance, regardless of how big or how small, you were intentionally declaring something, committing to something, and then making it happen. And it just becomes this over time, this practice of when I say something, it happens. When I say something, it happens. When I say something, it happens. And if you think about it, the bigger and bigger the project or the bigger and bigger the result, it becomes so much easier to be like, yeah, I'm going to make $100,000, $200,000, $1,000,000 next year. And it's going to happen because you have all of this evidence. You have all of this trust with yourself that every time that I say something's going to happen, I commit to it and I make it happen.
That's very eloquently said. I love, I mean, clearly you've been doing this work for a while. I'm curious, like outside of AC, like have you done like other things like NLP or like other coaching programs or?
So yes. So, um, let's see, what else have I done? I've done a lot of therapy, which is super important. And if you're not in therapy, go to therapy. Everyone listening, go to therapy. Therapy is awesome. Just read a lot. Honestly, the big piece of it. I'm just like, I'm like an avid reader. So I'm like reading constantly. And I think that's been a big part of like what's helped to form the way that I think about things and, my ability to talk about those things. I've done Landmark. I did the Landmark Forum
Oh,
a while ago.
a
Um,
lot of the stuff you're saying, I'm like, sounds very landmarky. I mean,
yeah, it does.
I'm a huge landmark person. I've done like the whole shebang. So,
Yeah, nice, cool. Yeah, it's funny. There's a lot of ontology, I think, in Landmark too. So accomplishment coaching and Landmark, and then I've been involved in so the coaching program that Davidson and I went through, accomplishment coaching. The opportunity as a participant or a first year participant is you go through the program. They teach you coaching skills. They teach you how to be a coach. And after you graduate from the program, you have the opportunity to go back and join the leadership team. So you actually have the opportunity to go back and help produce and run the program and then train and coach the people who are going through the program that next year. And it's the focus shifts from a focus on your coaching skill. Like you get feedback, which is great, and you get practice coaching people that you wouldn't, maybe normally have in your practice, which is a really good and valuable experience. But you also get a lot of leadership feedback, and it's constant. And by constant, I mean constant. Like sometimes I joke sometimes and I'm like, I feel like my job is literally taking feedback. Like that's my job, is like just taking feedback on my leadership and my communication style and how I talk to people.
Yeah.
And that's been really valuable. I've been inside of that structure for almost 3 years now.
Uh,
And week in, week out, day in, day out, like that, it's like you can't help but be changed by that experience.
uh,
So that's been really valuable. And then, just conversations with people, doing a lot of writing. Like I've been doing a lot of, especially recently, it's been really fun. I've been doing a lot more content. Cause I feel like recently the way that I've related to content and producing that kind of stuff is less about like, hey, I gotta put together this very unique thing that a bunch of people are going to like, and I have to come across a certain way and
yeah.
blah, blah, blah. Versus like, hey, let me just take what's in my brain right now and just write it down and then share it. So it becomes less like this intricate creation process and more of just let me just let the floodgates open of like what's already going on in my brain, and like let me record it online and then post it and then share it with people. And so that's helped a lot, even in just having the verbiage for it and like being able to talk about these things in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's nights when you have sleepless nights and you're like, why can't I sleep? And then once you start writing, once you start getting it out there via podcast, blogging,
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn articles, etc., like
Mm-hmm.
you're like, oh my God, like I feel so much better now, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like I think that's the beauty of creative people or creation. It's like once you get it out there, you're like, okay, I can sleep now. It's interesting.
Totally.
If I don't write, if I don't create like at least once a day, then I'm almost like anxious. Like I'm like I need to get this out to the world, or else like I just need to. It's almost like it's interesting. Yeah.
It's actually literally in this moment as you're saying that, I'm realizing, I'm like, wow, that's actually, I didn't realize how important that was to me. Like I didn't realize like how important that kind of creation process is. And you and I were talking before we started recording, but I've been going through a lot recently with my well-being and like how I take care of myself.
Huh.
And realizing that I sort of have like an addiction to activity. Like I have like an addiction to like just being busy and like doing things. And it just keeps me overwhelmed a lot of the time. Like I get things done and things happen, but I'm just overwhelmed a lot. And I realized recently too, it was actually this last week, I was like, I don't know what burnout feels like. I couldn't tell you, because it's been my norm. It's been the norm for me for so long that I'm like, this is normal. And so I'm like, well, that's interesting. That's an interesting thing to realize, and an interesting thing to like start to, get a handle on. But why I brought that up and what you shared was like, I'm realizing that part of the way that I feel like I'm going to make the biggest amount of impact is through that creation process.
Mm,
But if I am constantly overwhelmed
mm,
and running around and doing a billion million things, there's no space for that.
ah,
Not only just from a time perspective and like making time to sit down and
mm,
do that, but I'm even like energetically, mentally,
yeah,
emotionally, like you need that breathing room to be able to like sit down and like have stuff integrate,
mm,
and to be able to ideate, and to be able to get to the place where your thoughts are cohesive enough that you can create them into something, whether that's video or written content or, whatever it is. And I'm just, as you were saying that, I'm just realizing how important that is to me and how impactful that is. So of course I would want to, take better care of myself and give myself more room to have that kind of experience. Yeah, it was just cool. Thanks for sharing that.
yeah. It's interesting, right? Because the content, all the content, whether it's like rewriting your scripts, like via your podcast or obviously like your coaching programs. It's interesting because all this will impact people like permanently, right? It's like your legacy, right? So even, later in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, like you'll still be impacting people. And I think that's what's so cool about content, because a lot of this stuff is timeless, right? Like I bet you in
Yeah.
100 years, people are still going to be suffering from the same things, right? And still like, you know, have all these other people's agendas that that they feel like they have to do because they're
Hmm.
afraid of like setting stronger boundaries, right? Like
Yeah.
this is like a societal problem that's been here since like the beginning of dawn, like, you know, time.
Yeah. It's so funny because it's the human condition, right?
Yeah.
Like we as animals have not changed in the last couple hundred years, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years.
Yeah.
Like we look different, we dress up and we live in society and we have jobs and we spend money and we do things. But like fundamentally, biologically, we are the same animal as the one that didn't have any of this, that didn't live in civilized society, that only lived in groups of 50 to 150 people and were mainly hunter gatherers and more egalitarian communities and societies.
Mm.
So it's just so funny because it's like the basis from which we're operating is biological human nature. And
Yeah.
so it's like, yes, things change. We get more technology, we're more connected, we dress differently, we talk differently, but like ultimately it's the same thing. It's the same, we're the same animal at the end of the day. So yeah, I think you're spot on in that like a lot of these things are timeless. Like it's, you know, it's why things like, and granted, you know, I'm not religious, but things like the Bible or like Jewish holy books or, you know, like Lao Tzu or stuff from the Buddha or any of that stuff, like is still around, and you read it and you go, holy shit, like this is still so accurate. Like this, I literally feel like this is speaking to me and this is speaking to my experience because those people were able to get to such an elevated state of awareness and such an elevated state of consciousness that they were able to take what they saw and put it into words that we could actually resonate with. And I think the cool part about it, right, is you read it, and even if you haven't necessarily done any therapy work or coaching work, or if you don't consider yourself a conscious person, whatever it is, you can read it and go, yeah, that actually, I see that, like that resonates with me. So it's like there's somewhere in all of our human nature, regardless of who you are in your experience, that recognizes and relates to and connects to this more universal, you know, interconnected kind of experience. And that's definitely something that drives me. I think all the time about how can I take the things that I'm learning about myself and about other people and about how all of this is so interconnected, and how can I communicate it in a way that supports other people in understanding and coming to the same realizations that I've come to.
Mm.
Because I think if there's anything that I've realized in the past 3 years that I've been doing this work really aggressively, it's that everything that everyone is looking for, fulfillment, connection, intimacy, joy, happiness, peace, like everything that everyone's looking for is made available through interpersonal work, is made available through healing, is made available through getting more in relationship and getting more in connection with yourself. None of it comes externally.
Mm.
It all comes internally. It all comes down to the inner work that you do. And so, like I said, a big part of what drives me is like, how do I support other people in coming to that same realization? How do I create myself as a person, as a speaker, as a leader,
Hmm.
as someone who can show other people the way and support other people in coming to these same realizations? Because I think this is what we're all looking for.
Wow, that's a great wrap up and a great summary, Hayden. So I appreciate your time. I think, I mean, there's so many takeaways, right? I think at the core, at the essence, to your point, like we all have these, or what I've learned from our conversation, to summarize it, I would say we all have these like societal norms and these behaviors that stem from thousands of years ago, right? It's the wanting to be liked, wanting to be accepted by society, and we still operate from that super old school, you know, like mentality. And because of that, we're self-sabotaging ourselves by putting others first, by
Yeah.
not being able to actually be true on what we say we want to do, but
Yeah.
instead of like fulfilling everyone else's goals, essentially, right?
Mm,
Because of that, you know, we don't, if we don't disrupt these scripts, then we're gonna go about life and one day wake up and be like, damn, like I just spent 10 years at a company I didn't like and a job I
Mm,
didn't enjoy,
mm,
when the marriage that I was okay, and I didn't even make time to even go hiking or whatever it is that I want to do. It's like we're always
mm.
just, doing what we think what everyone else wants us to do, right? So
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you. I think you're spot on in that. And I think a big part of the work of my work as I see it and the impact that I want to have is supporting people in starting to understand where they were given, to your point, these societal scripts. When you grow up, you are taught as a child who you are, how to relate to yourself, how to relate to the world. And it also either expands or limits your view on what's possible for yourself in your life, what you're worthy of, the kind of relationship that you can have, the kind of job that you can have, the amount of happiness that you are allowed to experience on a day to day, week to week, year to year basis. And the interesting thing is that these scripts are totally made up. They're stories. They're not the truth. And so I'm really driven by supporting people in starting to break these scripts up, like actually becoming aware of where are these self-limiting beliefs getting in the way of what I want to create and the experience that I want to have, breaking those things up so that they, in essence, they can live more unscripted. Like, what does it mean to live a life totally outside of and devoid of the generational, oftentimes traumatic and disempowered scripts that you were given as a child? And it's not easy. The work isn't easy. Living unscripted is kind of scary because
yeah,
so much, I think, of how we identify as people is by the scripts that we were given when we were kids. And although it might not work in a sense, it's comfortable. We know it. We know what to expect when we follow the scripts that we were given as children. And we don't necessarily know what to expect when we're trying to live unscripted and when we're trying to do something different. But I think ultimately the opportunity is when you live unscripted, the only thing that you have to go off of is your authentic sense of self and your innate goodness. And I'm a very firm believer that human beings are innately good, innately wanting to serve, innately wanting to love, innately wanting to connect. And so it's very healing to get in touch with that more innate, natural part of yourself and choose from that place versus choosing from, hey, this is what I learned about myself when I was 6 or 7, and have that be the thing that runs the show for the rest of your life. So yeah, man, great conversation. I always love it when we connect and we're able to chat and talk about these things. And I love the work that you're doing here. So keep this up, man.
yeah. Thanks, Hayden. If anyone's interested in learning more, I'll link to your website, your LinkedIn.
Sweet.
Please reach out to him. He's you definitely have it's cool, right? Because it's relatable, right? Because you've achieved a certain amount of career success, so I think like that gives you like credibility, obviously. Because sometimes there's coaches that are almost like too woo woo. So in
Yeah.
a sense, like you can relate to like the high achieving business professional, right?
Mhm.
And then you have like the entrepreneurial mindset where you've done so many different things. So people are like, oh, okay, like if I'm too afraid to try a new venture, like he can help
Mhm.
me kind of
Mhm.
navigate through that. So
Mhm.
yeah, no, I really appreciate what you're doing, man. Like this is such a needed conversation, and thanks for being vulnerable and sharing some of the things are going on in your life. And I'm sure there'll
Totally.
be many more conversations that we'll have together. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Thanks, man.